I'm kind of a geeky guy, and I'm assuming that I'm surrounded by good geeky people, so it's good to see you here. I'm going to go ahead and launch right into the presentation. Do you want to control it for me, or?
Yeah, I'll share it.
Great. Fantastic. That's great. Yeah, you can go ahead and start that if you want. Thanks. So I just wanted to present this as kind of a brief introduction here. What you're looking at here is a visualization of the development of the OpenOffice project. So some of you are probably familiar with OpenOffice. It's a open source software package that kind of mimics the Microsoft Office package. And so what you're seeing here is essentially a visualization of different people in the open source community checking code in and out and making adjustments to it over time. So the reason I included this is just because I think it provides a really interesting visualization of really the power of open source. When you open up the source code to a software or to anything really, you're essentially allowing the world access to it. Anybody that wants to participate can be part of it. And so what you're seeing here is just this massive conglomeration of people participating on a software project. And I mean, one of the things I find really interesting about it, because I almost think it looks a lot like what I imagine the neural network in the brain to be like. You know, just kind of forming these connections and creating new connections and traveling down similar paths. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to take a look at in the beginning here. And I'll move on to the next slide. Do you want me to control this, or do you want to? Either way is fine. Great, thanks. So just a brief overview. I'm going to try to follow a linear format in this presentation. I'm going to deviate from that a little bit, but yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So free and open source software, and tomorrow is going to include a lot more than just software. I'm going to give you a nice history of where free software and open source software began, and then kind of launch into all the other things that have spawned from there. So the history of free software. Where did it come from? Back in the early days of the internet, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, the internet was really just a couple of computers on university campuses connected to each other, and then, you know, eventually they connected a campus to another campus, and it just really kind of grew from there. And it was essentially architected and designed and built by people like this guy, Richard Stallman, who worked at the Artificial Intelligence Lab at Massachusetts Institute of Technology back in the 60s. And I was going to play this video for you. I think anybody online is welcome to go ahead and play it now. It really doesn't say a whole lot, but it's actually an excerpt from a movie about early hackers. And it really is just an interesting soundbite from Richard Stallman himself. It doesn't say a whole lot more than just that the early hackers, the early programmers of the internet were really just technology enthusiasts. They were people that really just cared about programming and designing cool things and sharing their products with each other and with the world. So then down at the bottom there, I've got a link to Richard Stallman versus the printer jams. I think probably everybody in here and everybody out there has experienced printer jams before and how awful it can be. So really the free software movement started with a printer jam in this artificial intelligence lab at MIT. And Richard Stallman was, you know, trying to, I mean, this was back when printers were just starting to become more mainstream, put into departments where you could, you know, just print down the hall and it would print rather than, you know, having to have an operator kind of like churning these things out. And so back then there weren't like printer spool programs. And so people, like if multiple people sent a print job to the printer would jam. And you might not find out about it for an hour later when you went, you thought your thing would be printed and it just didn't print out. So Stallman was one of the, the hackers in this laboratory that designed programs that would fix things like this. Apparently they got a nice new Xerox printer one day and he tried to fix it. And it turned out that he couldn't get access to the source code of this printer, which is pretty common these days. You wouldn't expect to get access to a source code. But back then, it was kind of like when you buy a computer, when you buy a printer, when you buy some kind of electronic device, you could actually look at the source code, you could adjust it, you could change it, you could add a print spooler to it so that you don't get printer jams. So he was just kind of inflamed by this, that he couldn't go into this printer and fix it himself. And really, from there is where the free software movement started. So these, one more sec. So these early hackers, they were really just technology enthusiast programmers. They were geeks. People called them midnight programmers because they were the kind of people that would, work all day in the lab and then go home and program all night just because they were so psyched about it. You can go ahead and switch it. So I know that something that's something that came out of that Richard Stallman's experience with the printer jams. Back in those days, corporations were in need of good programmers, as they are now, as they always were. And they would kind of pluck these guys, all these really smart guys out of the lab and put them into corporate jobs. And Richard Stallman was one of the few that refused to go into the corporate world because what that meant was that you're working on software code that was closed to the public, proprietary. Again, that's pretty common these days, but back then it was kind of like, oh, you're part of the evil empire or something. So he developed what's called the GNU project. Stands for GNU is not Linux, and what it is it's its own operating system, Unix operating system that is based on these 4 fundamental freedoms. The freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose, freedom to modify the program to suit your needs. You can redistribute the copies of the program that you rebuilt, and you can change it and redistribute those changes. Change it, thanks. Something that came out of these 4 freedoms is what's known as the hacker ethic. So I know that probably a lot of you, a lot of people, associate hackers with kind of nefarious, kind of evil things, cracking into systems and designing viruses and so forth. So when people like Richard Stallman and this kind of group of early programmers talk about hackers, they're really talking about enthusiasts and people who are playful and just like to be programmers. So something that kind of came out of this spirit of programming were some of these ideals that you see here: sharing with the public, participating in open systems with no boundaries, decentralization. Mistrust of authority is part of it, and that doesn't necessarily mean you don't trust the cops or something. It's more that bureaucracies and corporations are generally interested in protecting their property and their intellectual property, and a lot of times they're inefficient at doing that, and so they kind of saw a different way to do that. Ego-boo is an interesting concept that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. But it comes from what people call the gift culture, that you don't get merit from your degrees or your age or your sex or any of these things. You get merit or you get credentials from what you've participated in and what you've given back to the community. So that was part of the hacker ethic. freedom of information. They believe all information would be free. And then world improvement is kind of an interesting one. You know, they're all kind of playfully trying to solve the world's problems in their own way. This is actually a photo of Steve Wozniak, one of the co-founders of Apple Computer. So it was in the 80s, Richard Stallman founded this organization called the Free Software Foundation. And you can see all these images here are different things that have come out of that. Copyleft is an embodiment of the hacker ethic, and it goes along with the GPL, the General Public License, which is a license that computer programmers can use to distribute their software. In a way, the GPL and copyleft are a hack of the law. So essentially anything you produce, any kind of intellectual property you produce, is automatically protected under copyright law. And essentially this license says that we don't want copyright law to apply to this body of work. We want to actually share this with the world, and we want, essentially it guarantees for all the future incarnations of any software that's released under the GPL will be released under the same license. So you can't ever really take something that's been produced by a program and lock it down and not release it, essentially. GNU I already mentioned. ODF is the open document format. Windows 7 Sins is another project they have that's kind of just describes how bad Windows is in terms of free software. And then the Defective by Design project is attempting to eliminate digital rights management. They reframe it as digital restrictions management. So what's next? Linux. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Linux. This guy on the right is Linus Torvalds. He's a Finnish programmer that when he was 21, he was in university, and kind of like Richard Stallman, just kind of saw a better way to do things. He started designing this operating system called Linux. And essentially released it to the public and invited people to participate and collaborate with him. So you know, when I played that visualization in the beginning, I kind of think of like what he's kind of put that out there, and then suddenly there's just this kind of conglomeration of minds that have combined to build this project. And you can see that stat down there at the bottom. 60% of web servers run on Linux. This was in 2008. I'm guessing that that's grown. I'm not positive. And that there on the left was Tux, the penguin that Linux kind of defined as their mascot. So from this, we have open source software. This guy on the right, Eric Raymond, wrote the book there on the left, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And it was, as it says, his musings on Linux and open source. And it really it kind of brought a lot of people into the fold of the open source movement. Just kind of conceptualizing what it actually is. He's talked a lot about the gift economy, that, you know, giving away, just building something and giving it away was an important part of open source. The value of the work of a programmer only comes from the sharing of information technology. And this value is enriched when work is widely shared in the source code form, not only the results in a precompiled binary. So he was obviously a hacker himself, but he was also a thinker. This is kind of a famous quote that you may see around: given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So, I mean, that's kind of, you know, it also makes me think of systems like Wikipedia. You know, it's kind of, again, it's an interesting analogy to the open source model, in that you really just have this body of knowledge that anybody can participate in. And if somebody puts a wrong piece of information, some kind of error up there, it's often fixed almost immediately. So that kind of goes along with that quote there, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Please. So the next progression in open source, some of you probably remember the Netscape browser. So Netscape was an internet web browser that 2008 was just not doing so well. And apparently Eric Raymond in this book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, had a lot of influence on their decision to open source the product. So they essentially took the source code and said, this is the property of the world now. So they sent it out, and they built this organization called Mozilla. I'm sure some of you have heard of. They work on Firefox and all sorts of other open source softwares. And they've got some really interesting contributions to the open source model. I mean, not only do they build open source software, but their organizational structure is built around open source. Case study for sure. And then from there, we have the Open Source Initiative. So this was, this started, I believe it was in 1999 or 2000. And it was an attempt to kind of take a lot of the people that were becoming disenchanted with Richard Stallman's free software movement, which was really built around a philosophy and very strict philosophy of freedom. You know, he was really kind of bent around the freedom of information, the freedom of the source code, and he didn't want there to be any restrictions whatsoever on that freedom. So the Open Source Initiative was a bit of a response to that in saying that, you know, we want to be able to make money off of this. We want to present this to corporations, and it's still actually, I mean, most of the open source ideologies are still in line with the original free software manifesto. You know, the free redistribution of code, the way that works are derived and shared, distribution of licensing. A lot of this stuff comes, you know, from the early days of the free software movement. So they actually were very successful in kind of taking this to the mainstream. And today you just have, you know, countless projects, open source software projects, and really a philosophy and that's really propagated across all sectors of the economy. So, you know, back then, I mean, and now obviously too, it's very important in the software domain. But I mean, you'll see the open source model applied to countless places. So if you switch, just kind of collected a few of these examples here. So open education, kind of the idea that we put knowledge out in the open, that we share information, that information should be freely available. So has anybody heard of the Khan Academy? So this is this guy, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Khan, and looks like I spelled it wrong there, but you can essentially, this guy single-handedly just, I mean, created this library of over, you know, 2,600 videos that span essentially all subjects. You know, I'm a student in the Corbell School, and I have, you know, I'm on the Facebook page checking out people that are struggling with their stats class, and somebody had posted a link to this Khan Academy collection of stats videos. There was like 40. So I mean, it's one example of open education in kind of the open source model applied to education. Really just this guy that decided that he wanted to share his knowledge with the world, and he just kind of put it out there. So what are some of the other examples? Peer-to-peer university, similar to the Khan Academy, it's really this online space that it's just kind of been built by a group of people that they welcome anybody to create courses and curricula on any subjects, and then teach classes, you know, in the same format as you would take in a university setting. Another good example is the MIT OpenCourseWare project. So the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, is about 10 years ago, they started this project to essentially put all of the syllabi, and all of the course materials that they present in all of their courses, and to put them online in an open access repository. So you can see all the courses that you can take. I mean, you're going to be taking, or at least looking at the same materials as astrophysicists at MIT. You can take courses right alongside of them. So you won't get a degree from MIT, but you can at least know what they're studying and have a good idea of that content. So that's open source education. Open government, there's a few different examples there. And so in the case of the USA, I put a link to the Open Government Transparency Initiative that Obama's been kind of trying to build off of. He just asked all of his top-level departments to provide data on their websites about all their activities. So that's one example. Another kind of perspective on that is in the case of Malaysia or Brazil, the implementation of open source software. So these are developing countries that in a lot of cases can't or don't want to buy Microsoft Windows licenses. And so they've implemented open source using Ubuntu or different installs of Linux in all their governmental departments, and implemented open document formats, essentially guaranteeing that people who don't have access to Microsoft Windows can still open that, and have access to that data. What else is up? Just a couple minutes? Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I think you pretty much get the idea here. This is really a wide open field. And what is open source in the end? I think that the best way to describe it is a production model. It's a distributed production model of labor, really. But it's applicable to so many different sectors of the economy, and it's really experiencing explosive growth, and for good and for bad. Actually, I've got a link here at the bottom for open source political action. The left one is the Occupy Wall Street movement, and people are describing as an open source protest because it's decentralized, it has no head. If people kind of hop in and hop out as they please. The other link there is open source warfare. People are describing groups like Al-Qaeda as open source groups, and so really, even Al-Qaeda itself has described itself as an open source collaborative. It's really just kind of this headless organization that people kind of hop in and hop out and do whatever they want. They participate however they want. So again, it's really applicable all across the economy. And I'll end it there. Thank you so much for coming. And the presentation's available online. Feel free to check it out if you want to see any of these links. And my contact info is all there too. And I'd love to meet some of you in another forum sometime. It's glad to see so many people here. Yeah, of course.